Okay, let's go ahead and get things kicked off here. Thank you all so much for attending. In our session today, we're going to take the next hour and a half, 2 hours or so, and take a look at building web applications with Rust, Actix Web, and HTMX. This is going to be kind of an overview of combining these technologies together to start building a web application. If we have a lot of interest in this topic, I'm considering a part 2 to this training session that incorporates more features. But we'll see how well this topic is received and how interested people are in it. Before we get into the slide deck and then ultimately the programming content, if you do have any questions on the material that we're covering, I would encourage you to put those questions into the Q&A. So there is both a chat feature in Teams and a Q&A feature. The Q&A feature is really where I'd like you to put the questions, although it looks like Teams is telling me Q&A was not set up. That's odd. Well, if the Q&A is not working for you, just put the questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer those as I see them, or I may wait to the end and then kind of answer all the questions at the end. We'll just kind of see how things flow as we go through the content. With that said, can you all see my screen? Just somebody let me know in the chat if you can see my screen. Awesome, perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into this and learn some things about working with Rust, Actix Web, and HTMX. So a couple of things I want to say at the outset before we get into the content. So this is our programmer to programmer free training series. My regular work is as a corporate trainer. I teach companies all over the world how to use technologies like this and a whole host of other topics. But one of the things I wanted to do was deliver free training through this kind of webinar style format to people anywhere who'd like to learn more about these technologies. Not all of us have the opportunity to work for large companies that provide lots of training opportunities. And so I want to try to deliver some of the content that we would deliver in those training sessions through these webinars so that everyone can benefit from it. The trainings have been set up to use popular or up and coming technologies. For this particular session we're going to have here, you should be able to code along with me inside of GitHub code spaces if you'd like. And we'll take a look at using various tools to kind of help us build these applications. And the idea here ultimately is that with, of course, the power of the internet, anybody can learn from anywhere. So you don't have to get on an airplane and travel somewhere else to learn something about programming. We can do that here through our sessions together. If you'd like to connect with us, we have our website, trainingforprogrammers.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of the primary ways that I let people know about upcoming events in addition to our mailing list. So if you'd like to know about upcoming events, definitely follow us. And then when we post those events up on LinkedIn, you'll get access to them. On YouTube, we have our channel. I put all of the recordings up on YouTube. Most of the trainings that we do in this series are made available to everyone following the session. And so they all go up on the YouTube channel and you can check it out there. If you'd like to email me with any questions or comments or ideas on things, you can always email me at community@trainingforprogrammers.com. I don't have any upcoming sessions scheduled at the moment. We had one originally scheduled for a couple of weeks from now, but I had to unfortunately cancel that. I am going to reschedule it at some point in the future. I just won't be able to do it in 2 weeks. I'm sitting down and looking at my schedule coming up here for the fall, and I'll be putting together a number of new topics and sessions that we'll be using to go over Rust and other technologies. So far, we've really focused in on Rust for the most part, but I do teach a lot of other things. And so we'll be incorporating some other technologies into future sessions. I'm also looking at doing some things like office hours and stuff like that for people who who might be interested. Even though I don't have any training sessions scheduled at the moment, like I said, if you follow us on LinkedIn or get on the mailing list, I will be sending out updates on those upcoming sessions. Also, you can join us on our Discord group and be able to ask questions about technologies over there as well. In addition to the free sessions that we do, like I said before, my primary occupation is delivering customized private training to companies. If you like this content and you work for a business and you've got a team of developers you'd like to kind of upskill in this area or cover other topics that I teach, definitely encourage you to reach out to me. We offer great prices on training, especially compared to other training companies. The two classes that I teach that are related to the content we're talking about here are Web APIs with Rust and Actix Web, and then full stack web apps with HTMX. Almost time to learn. A couple of things I want to remind everybody about. First of all, thank you for registering and attending. Number two, take a chance to go back and watch the recording, practice the demos, look at the code that we have pushed up. Within 72 hours following the events, that's what, 3 days, I will send out a link to the repo, your badge, and I will post the recording. Generally, I do that the same day as I hold the event, but following the event today, I'll be heading out of town, so I won't be able to process the video and stuff this afternoon like I normally would. So just be patient. By the end of the weekend, everything will be uploaded into YouTube and badges sent out, so on and so forth, and we'll have everything taken care of from this session here. At the end, I'm going to give you a class survey. If you don't mind filling it out, the feedback that we receive from the survey helps us decide on future topics to talk about, adjustments we might make to the training to make it better for you. And so at the end, I'm going to give you the survey. It only takes a few moments to fill it out, and if you could do that, we would greatly appreciate it. Okay, so let's do a quick little overview of the three technologies we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to get straight away into the code. So Rust is an up-and-coming, becoming very popular programming language. Most people think of Rust as a systems-level programming language. It's particularly well known for its memory-safe features without requiring the garbage collector. But Rust can be used for so many more things than just, systems-level programming. You can use Rust to build regular, everyday, business-type applications like web applications, as you're going to see. When it comes to all the memory safety stuff, of course, there's always some challenges that come along with that. In fact, I'll actually explore one of those memory safe challenges in the Actix web application that we're going to be looking at. But it's like anything else. Once you learn Rust, once you understand how it works, it's really not that bad. And just from a practical perspective, if you are a person who makes use of tools like a GitHub Copilot or Tab9, those new AI code completion, code suggestion tools, if you take those tools and combine them with Rust, it's amazing how much easier it is to program in Rust. So no doubt Rust is difficult, but if you take Rust and combine it with some AI tooling, it really makes it a much easier language to work with. And then you can be using a really great language to build a whole variety of applications, such as web apps. Let's talk a little bit about Actix Web. Actix Web is just nothing more than a server-side web framework. So if you've worked with things like Flask and Python, or you've worked with Express and Node.js, or ASP.NET MVC on the .NET stack, or Spring Boot on the Java side, that's really all it is. It's just designed for working with Rust. A lot of the same features that you would see in those other technologies, you will see in Actix Web. Actix Web is not the only option you have in the Rust ecosystem. There's a number of other web frameworks that you can use. I've chosen to use Actix Web here because back when I was first working with Leptos is that client side. It's really a full stack framework too, but it's the whole client side WebAssembly usage of Rust. Well, on the Leptos website, when I was first learning Leptos, it recommended using Leptos with Actix Web. And so that's where I had my first exposure working with Actix Web to do server-side web programming combined with Leptos. And so I got to thinking, what if we just got rid of the Leptos and just use something like HTMX? As awesome as Leptos is, and I love working with Leptos, it still suffers from the same problems that most WebAssembly things do. There's this huge download of the WebAssembly program into the browser. Well, if we replace Leptos with HTMX, we get a much smaller download, but I chose to stick with Actix Web as my server-side framework. If you want to check out other ones out there, feel free to do so, but that's how we ended up with Actix Web here. And then finally, we have HTMX. So HTMX is starting to become very popular. HTMX basically allows you to have a client-side JavaScript type application experience without having to write JavaScript. So if you kind of think about it in the kind of the web ecosystem, we have a couple of common patterns that you see. We have the traditional server-side web app, where every DOM update requires reloading the page from the server. We have the JavaScript single-page frameworks, where basically you write all of your code in JavaScript with a tool like React or Angular. And then the new thing, the Leptos stuff we were learning about last month, you can do WebAssembly in the web browser to implement your application. Well, all three of those have their pluses and their minuses. The downside to the server-side rendering is everything's a page reload and the user experience isn't very good. The challenge with things like React and Angular is that they have a pretty steep learning curve. A lot of people don't like working in JavaScript, and you have to download this big JavaScript application into the browser. On the Leptos side, Leptos is awesome, but if you're doing the client-side code with the WebAssembly, that also can be a very, very big download. What HTMX does is it allows us to have the simplicity of the server rendering, but the user experience of the single page application without the bulk of downloading all of that JavaScript or all of the WebAssembly code. And you still get to code in whatever your favorite server-side language is. So we're using Rust for our server-side language, but HTMX can be combined with anything. You could use PHP, you could use Python, you could use Java, you could use Go, what have you. So we're going to be using that as our client-side library, but basically writing no client-side code. And you'll kind of see how this works. Now, HTMX is awesome, and I love working with it, but it also has its own little challenges, and I'll talk about some of those as we go through the content together. So with that said, let's go ahead and do some programming here in Rust, Actix Web, and HTMX. So the way we have this set up is I have the GitHub repo here. And yes, it actually is set to public. For those of you who have attended some of my last couple of webinars, for whatever reason, I left it as private and we had to make the adjustment during the session. But today I remembered to actually make it public. I'm going to give you the link to it here, and I'm going to drop that into the chat. For those of you who are just joining us, if you have questions as we go along, don't hesitate to put those questions in the chat. For whatever reason, the Q&A mechanism isn't appearing to work. So just put your questions in the chat along the way. And as I see those questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. So in our repository here, we can come over and create a GitHub code space, and you'll be able to run the code with me. Now, to do this, you have to be logged into GitHub. Number two, once you're logged into GitHub, you're going to want to fork the repository and then create the code space off the fork. If you create the code space off of my repo, you won't be able to save or commit any of your changes. But if you fork it, then when you create the code space off the fork, then you'll be able to commit your changes back to your repo. So here on mine, I've already created a code space. I'm going to go ahead and just fire this up, and we'll let it kind of come back to life here real quick. So go ahead and create your code space if you'd like to code along. If you would rather just watch the session and not code along, that's fine too. You can always go back later, make the fork, do the code space, and practice the code on your own. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. So remember, with these code spaces, it's basically VS Code running in a web browser, and all of it is running inside of a Docker container. So essentially this dev container here, has the configuration for the code space, which is based off of a Docker file that I have from one of my Docker Hub repos. Okay, so let me give you a quick overview of how this is set up Rust-wise, and then we'll get right into the content together. So the way I have this set up is in the root folder of the repo. I have a cargo toml file, which is basically just a workspace file that references the projects here that we're going to be talking about. Now, inside the projects folder is a Hello World project that's been completed. We're actually going to build the Hello World project together, so you can see all the parts and pieces that go into setting up this application, because we have to tie together Rust, Actix Web, HTMX. We kind of need to see how those parts come together before we get into something here that's going to be more complicated. All right. Now, hold on one second. All right, perfect. So here we have a little to-do list application that we're going to walk through. Now, this is not the most complex application ever created. I've selected the topics that I'm going to cover so that they'll fit nicely into our time period together. But this is by no means a comprehensive course on everything you would need to know if you wanted to build these kinds of applications. So underneath docs here, I've got a file called Hello World Actix Web HTMX. If you'd like, you can go ahead and open up that file. You can also view that file here in the web browser if you'd like. And the way I've set this up is that you can go through and kind of copy and paste all the commands in the code, so we can see what it looks like to actually build one of these applications and bring the parts and pieces together. So what I'm going to do is come back over to here. And if you'd like to code along with me, you'll need to have a terminal window. You can go over to the little menu over here, the little 3 lines, go down to terminal, click on new terminal, and it'll give you a terminal window here right inside of VS Code. We need to change into the projects folder, which is where we're going to be creating our new Hello World project. So make sure that once you open the terminal, make sure you change into that projects folder. And then once you're in the projects folder, we're going to walk step by step through the instructions. Okay, I'm going to collapse this down so you can kind of see my terminal a little better, because the path here is awfully long. What I'm going to do is come over to the instructions here, and we're going to start first by creating a new project. So I'm going to copy the command here by clicking the little copy icon in GitHub. I'll come over to here and I'm going to paste this. It'll ask you if you're going to allow copying and pasting. I'll go ahead and say allow, and then I'll be able to run this. So I'll run this and it's going to create my project for me. Now you'll notice here it says adding as a member of the workspace. When you do the cargo new, it will automatically update that workspace file where all of the projects are listed. So we don't have to go back to that top level cargo toml file and modify it. Cargo new will do that automatically for us. So now that we've created our project, now we need to go ahead and change into that project folder. So I'll come back over here and paste. So now I'm inside the project folder. Now in the project folder, you'll see we have a regular source and main RS file, and then we have that cargo toml that was created for the project. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add Actix Web to the project. So I'll copy that, paste that into here, and now when I add the Actix Web, you can see it's been listed here as a dependency. Now, what we need to do next is we need to put some content into the main RS file to be able to serve up kind of a hello world endpoint so we can see Actix Web kind of doing its thing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to come back over to the code space into the main RS file, and I'm going to go ahead and paste this into here. Now, before we run this, let me walk you through a couple of key things I need you to be aware of in terms of getting up and running here with Actix Web. So first of all, like any other Rust program, there is a main function. So even though we're going to build this web application, you still have the same main function that you'd have in any other Rust project. Inside the main function, we're going to be creating an HTTP server, and that server is going to be hosting the application that we're going to put together. So you really have two parts here. You have the server, which of course is going to bind to an IP address and a port, and it's going to run. Then as part of that server, we're basically registering this application, which is going to have all of the different endpoints and application logic and stuff like that. That's a part of it. You'll see here, as part of creating the new application, we're going to register a service. The service here is basically just this single endpoint. You'll notice that we are using some declarative syntax here to describe that this is going to respond to a GET request, and this is going to respond to a request at the root of the website. You'll notice that everything here is asynchronous, okay? So Actix Web behind the scenes is taking care of all of that asynchronous configuration for us, and we'll be defining our methods as async functions. You'll notice here that we're going to be returning back an OK response, and as part of that, we're going to be specifying hello world as the body that gets returned. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and let's verify that we actually get this page loaded up. And then once we've done that part, we're going to configure the web application to serve up static content, and then we're going to configure it to work with HTMX. So you can see there's a number of steps we have to go through, but I've outlined them all here in this document. So following the session, you can go take this, create your own new project from scratch, and then start building out your own content for it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the command here, cargo run, and we're going to jump into here, and I'm going to go ahead and just paste that command, and it should go ahead and compile the application. Now, like any type of Rust application, compiling, of course, is the one big downside with Rust. This compiled really fast, but when you see the other things we're going to add, it'll take a few moments to get it compiled. But once it's compiled and up and running, you can click on Open in Browser, and you should get something that looks like this. Just a very simple hello world text being returned back from the root of our website. Nothing too exciting, but it works. Now, as we're going along through here, if you do run into any technical issues with the code space, or you run into technical issues with any of the code, what have you, because of our limited time together, I can't really provide a lot of support in the moment. But following the session, if you run into any challenges or difficulties, just reach out to us on Discord, and I'll be more than happy to help you over there with whatever questions you have about the environment. Okay, so now that we've done this initial running of the app, now we're going to go ahead and put together some static content that we can serve up from the web application. To do that, I'm first going to stop the web app. So just hit Control-C inside of your terminal window, and that will stop the web server. Then I'm going to come over to here, and I'm going to create a static folder, and then we're going to put an index.html file in that folder. So I'm going to copy this here. I'm going to come down into here and go ahead and paste that. So just so we don't get too lost, the static folder is not inside the source folder. So the static folder and the source folder are siblings to each other. So the source folder only contains Rust code. The static folder is going to have an index.html file. You can put other things in the static folder, like you could put images and JavaScript files and CSS files. Our to-do list application, you'll see where we're going to put some CSS files. But for right now, we'll just have this index.html file. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to take this and paste this in just like that. So go ahead and copy and paste the content for the index.html. All right, once you've copied that content over, we need to configure Actix Web to serve up static files. Now, we could write our own code that goes out and parses the URL and reads the file system for the file and then sends the content back. But that's a lot of work and completely unnecessary. Instead, what we're going to do is use the Actix files crate to do that heavy lifting for us. If you find yourself writing code for these applications that is basically solving problems that feel like they're pretty common problems other people have to solve all the time, that usually means there's a crate that can probably help you do that. Serving static content is one of those common problems that every web framework has. There's a crate to help us. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the cargo add command here. I'm going to come back over and paste that, and I'll let that go ahead and add the crate here to our project. I'm then going to come into here and update the contents of the main RS file with this content here. So go ahead and just copy this, and then come over to the main RS and replace all the content with that. So you can see we have all the same essential ingredients. We have the main function, we have the server, we have the application. But this time, instead of registering my custom function for, handling the request, now I'm going to leverage Actix files, and I'm going to register a service that will serve up content from that static folder. Okay, I'll go ahead and save this. I'm going to come down to here and do cargo run, and then we'll verify that our index page pops up. So I'll copy this here, come down into here and do paste. We'll go ahead and run this. I'll open this up in my browser again, and you can now see that I am getting my web page right here. So there's the content, and there's the page loaded up there. I'm going to pause for a second and let you go ahead and run that and verify that it works for you. I've got a question here in the chat. Let me go ahead and take a look at this question here real quick. The front end design for a multi-page production web app would look like, well, so At this stage of the game, we haven't really gotten into the HTMX part of it, which is really probably where it would be best to answer this question. But let me answer this question without HTMX for the moment. Let's just say that we've got this server-side web app. We've got this static content here. If we wanted to just use the technology we're using at the moment to build our web application, a multi-page app would be literally loading up a different page from the web server and reloading in the web browser. So it wouldn't be like a React or Angular app where you're just swapping out part of the DOM tree as the user is clicking around. Right now, with how this is configured, you would be doing the more traditional server-side application and loading up each page from the server as you're using it. When we get into HTMX, you'll see how HTMX is kind of a blend of a server render, but a swapping out of the DOM tree in the browser without doing a page reload. But we haven't gotten that far yet. But when we get to that, you'll see how those kind of come together. So there's our index file being served up through our service for the static files. The final step that we need to do is we need to bring in the HTMX piece. We need to bring in the HTMX JavaScript file. Even though we're not going to be coding any JavaScript, HTMX itself is still a JavaScript library, and so we have to pull that library in. We're also going to add some content that will work with that library in the way that HTMX is designed for coding. And then finally, we're going to have to add some code on the server side to be able to respond to the server call that HTMX is going to make as part of making the web application dynamic. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this, and we're going to come back over to the index page, and I'm going to drop the script tag up here. Notice I'm not putting it at the bottom because I have the defer keyword here. It's not going to block the rendering of the DOM tree because I've got the script up in the header. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the content of the body with this button right here. So I'll come back over here and replace the H1 with the button. Now, before we take a look at the Rust side, let's conceptually talk about what's going to happen here. So first of all, when you do HTMX programming, you use little, if no, JavaScript. Now, in a real full-blown HTMX app that does complex things, there will be some JavaScript. But conceptually, the idea behind HTMX is that I can program this dynamic behavior through the use of HTML attributes that HTMX is aware of and provides JavaScript code behind the scenes for. So for example, take our button. When I click this button, it's going to fire off this request to the server. Now, buttons do not provide out of the box the ability to make a fetch request or an AJAX call back to the server. That's not something built into buttons. What HTMX does, though, is it basically gives this button superpowers, and we can access those superpowers through this custom attribute. And so HTMX looks for this custom attribute and knows how to respond to the button click to then make a request back to the server. So the question then is, what is the server going to return back to us? Well, in an application like React or Angular, typically the server would return back to you JSON, which is just data. And then your React or Angular application would take that JSON, process it, and then update the DOM tree with whatever custom logic you have that utilizes that data. Here, though, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is when you call the hello world endpoint here, you're not going to be getting back JSON. You're going to be getting back HTML. That HTML is going to be used by HTMX to swap the current HTML at some location in the DOM tree with the new HTML that's coming in. So technically, the HTML is being server rendered just like a traditional server-side app, but it's being hot swapped in the DOM tree just like you would do in a React or Angular application. So here, the hot swapping is going to occur on the outer element of the button here, okay? It's going to occur on the outer element of the button here. Now, in order for this to work, we have to implement server-side code in the Rust application to serve up this HTML. So we have the client-side piece done here, but we haven't written the server-side piece yet. So if we come down to here, you'll see where we're going to add a new file called route.ts. In that file, we're going to add a function called hello world. And notice the response here is going to be a string of HTML. We're going to take that function, register it, and then when we go to load this up, it's going to run. Now, we do have one small little typo here. I have routes pluralized down here, but route here is singular. So when we go to create this file, we'll want to make sure that we call it route with an S. And Matt, thank you for pointing out the typo. So let's go ahead and take route here. Well, sometimes it cooperates for a copy paste, sometimes it doesn't. I'm just going to copy that. And let's come over to here and let's do new file routes.rs. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, the beauty of modern technology, I'm going to come in here and modify, let's see, where is it? Right down here. I'm going to modify that to be routes. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the code here, and we'll update our file like that. Now, it's grayed out because I haven't connected it into the main RS file yet, which we're going to do here in a second. I'm going to come down here and just copy this whole block of code. And we'll come back over to here, open up main RS. We'll paste that in. And there we go. We have our static files. We have our hello world. Everything looks good. So now what we can do is do cargo run the application, and let's see what we get back. So I'm going to come down here and hit Control-C. Run this again, it'll recompile. Go ahead and come back to my web browser and reload. Now, I'm going to open up my browser developer tools here. I'm going to reload this from the server. You can see this is the document that we get back. This is requesting the JavaScript code and downloading it into the browser for the HTMX. So the idea here is that when I click on the Hello World button, a request is made back to the server generates HTML, and it should replace the button with the HTML. So if I click on Hello World, you'll now see the DOM tree here has changed. And so now the button is replaced with the H1. But you'll also notice we did not reload the page here. You can see that it was an XHR request that was made, and this just returned back that snippet of HTML. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to click on Preserve Log. I'm going to clear the log here. I'm going to refresh. Now, because I have Preserve Log on, we'll be able to see if there's any page reloads and stuff like that. If I click on Hello World, you'll see the only call that was added was the one to get this content back. So you can see we have a mix, right? I have a server-side app in the sense that I'm rendering HTML server-side, but I also have a client-side app in that HTMX is swapping out part of the DOM tree with new content without reloading from the server. So here's the thing before we get into our more complex demonstrations. If you are a person who does not like JavaScript, you don't enjoy coding in JavaScript, you don't enjoy using things like React and Angular, you really do prefer server-side web development, HTMX is a great way for you to be able to leverage those server-side coding skills and that preference for server-side programming while still getting the benefit of that great user experience that people enjoy with React and Angular applications. You could do the same thing with Leptos and do the Rust as WebAssembly in the browser. And that's great too, because you can write your code in Rust, so on and so forth. It's also a nice little component-based framework. But remember that download of the WebAssembly can definitely be a little bit of a performance hit on that initial load of the application. So that's really where HTMX fits in. It allows you to do server-side programming, but gives you that really nice single-page application type of user experience. One last comment I'll make just from a programming perspective before we dive into the more complicated demos. I've been doing web development now for little over 27 years. So I got started back in the summer of 1997 with a technology called Classic ASP. And at the time it was Internet Explorer 3 and Netscape Navigator 3. And that summer that I got started building these web apps, I also discovered JavaScript. And so I've been using JavaScript for just as long. So I've kind of seen the evolution of the web really over the last 27 years. Each of these different models for running a web application has their good points and their bad points. I'd say the biggest challenge that I've had in moving to HTMX is two things. Number one, sometimes when you place these attributes, they don't work as expected. And when they don't work, I mean like they literally don't do anything. And I found some of my early struggles with HTMX was navigating the documentation, online examples, and trying to understand why the attributes weren't working as expected. At least with things like React and Angular, when they break, you usually get a lot of error messages. With HTMX, when you're first learning how to use the attributes and things just don't work, you do feel a little bit lost because there's no error messages most of the time. In many cases, you're just trying to use it in a way that it doesn't support, so it just doesn't do anything. That's one, in my opinion, from a developer experience, one negative thing that I've had in my personal working with it. The second thing that I've also struggled a little bit with is not a hard thing to overcome, but it is a mental shift. In my mind, because of my years of experience, I think of server rendering as rendering the whole page on the server, or I think of client-side rendering as getting JSON from the server. But this mix of doing a partial render on the server and a partial update on the client, I find sometimes putting that mix together, I have to take a moment and take a step back and rethink how I'm trying to solve the problem.
So my brain is an automatic, oh, full server rendering or automatic handle JSON. But because we're doing a little bit of both here, sometimes when you're writing the code, you can get a little tripped up because you get used to writing things one way or another. But this is like half and half. And so I found that I've had to take a step back at certain times and remind myself, oh, that's right. I'm trying to build the HTML here, and then it's just going to be swapped out over here in this one part of the DOM tree on the client. That's just my own personal struggles that I've had in working with HTMX. You might not have those struggles. You might have, your own set that you have to work through. But those are the two things that I've experienced in working with it. Do I like HTMX? Absolutely. Would I use it as an alternative to React or Angular? Absolutely. But I also still like React and Angular, and I still like Leptos, and I still like Blazor. I think all of these tools can be really, really useful. You just have to decide what works best for the project that you're working on. With that said, let's continue our discussion on these technologies, and let's take a look at a little bit of a to-do list application here so that you can kind of see how these parts kind of come together.